loneliness is killing you, not metaphorically. I mean that in the most literal sense I can say it without being dramatic about it. Loneliness, real, chronic, the kind that has been living in you for a while now, does measurable damage to your body, your mind, your ability to think clearly and feel things fully and trust the world enough to move through it with any kind of ease. It shortens your life. That's not a figure of speech. Studies exist. The data is real. Chronic loneliness is as damaging to your physical health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Your immune system weakens. Your sleep deteriorates. Your cortisol levels stay elevated in ways that wear down organs and accelerate aging and make you more susceptible to illness in ways that accumulate quietly over years. And beyond the physical and what it does to the inside of a person, to the way you see yourself and other people, and the possibility of connection, to the specific distortions it introduces into your thinking that you probably stop recognizing as distortions because they've been there so long. They just feel like how things are. That's what I want to talk about. Not loneliness as a temporary feeling, not the kind that comes after a move or a breakup or a bad week. The other kind, the kind that has settled in, the kind you carry around inside a full life, surrounded by people, smiling at the right moments and still somehow completely unreachable. That kind is killing you, and I think you've known that for a while. Let me start with the version of loneliness nobody talks about honestly, because when most people picture loneliness, they picture the obvious version, the person with no friends, no partner, no one to call. The visible, external, easily diagnosed version. That version is real, but it's not the most common one, and it's not the most painful one. The most common version is the one where you have people. You have friends maybe, a family, a relationship or a history of them, a social life that looks functional from the outside, people who would say they know you, who would show up if something went seriously wrong, who genuinely care about you in the way that people care about people they've known for a long time, and you are still lonely. Specifically, persistently, quietly lonely in the middle of all of that. Not because the people aren't real, not because the relationships aren't real, but because somewhere along the way, gradually without a specific moment you can point to, the full version of you stopped showing up in those relationships. The edited version came instead, the managed version, the version that knew what to share and what to keep back, what would land and what would create distance, what parts of itself were safe to offer and what parts needed to stay private. And the people in your life know and love that version, the edited one, and that love is real. And it also cannot touch the loneliness, because the loneliness lives in the gap between who you are and who you're letting people see. Nobody can reach you through that gap, not because they don't want to, because you built it too carefully to let anyone through. I want to talk about how the gap gets built, because it doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small decisions across years, in response to things that made perfect sense at the time. It starts with a moment, sometimes several moments, where you were fully yourself and it cost you something, where you said the true thing and it didn't land the way you needed it to, where you showed the vulnerable part and it was handled carelessly, where you trusted someone with the real version of you and they used it wrong, or just didn't know what to do with it, or drifted away from the relationship not long after. And you learned from that. Of course you did. You're not stupid. You saw the pattern. Full self equals risk. Managed self equals safety. And you adjusted accordingly. You became more careful, more discerning, more intentional about what you offered and to whom. That was smart. At the time, that was genuinely smart. The management was protective. It kept you from certain kinds of hurt that the unmanaged version had walked directly into, but it also kept you from certain kinds of connection, the kind that requires the real version of you to be present, because you can only be truly known by someone if you're actually there, and you stopped being fully there, and the loneliness is the cost of that absence. Here's what chronic loneliness does to the way you think, because I think this is the part that does the most invisible damage over time. It distorts your perception of other people, not dramatically, not in a way that looks like paranoia or delusion, in subtle, continuous ways. When you're lonely for long enough, your brain starts to interpret ambiguous social signals as negative. The person who didn't text back becomes someone who is pulling away. The friend who seemed distracted becomes someone who is losing interest in you. The slight shift in tone becomes evidence of something wrong. This is not a character flaw. This is a documented neurological response to chronic loneliness. The brain, deprived of reliable connection, becomes hypervigilant about threats to connection. It scans harder. It interprets more. It finds danger in things that aren't dangerous. And because it keeps finding danger, it keeps triggering the protective responses, the pulling back, the managing, the careful editing of yourself in social situations, the preemptive distance to avoid the hurt of rejection. And those protective responses increase the loneliness, which increases the hypervigilance, which increases the protective responses. You worsen the thing you're afraid of by trying to protect yourself from it. That loop can run for years without anyone, including you, fully understanding what's happening. You just know that connection feels hard, that people feel exhausting, that it takes a lot of effort to be around others, and you always feel slightly drained by it and slightly relieved when it ends. And you tell yourself you're an introvert, or you're going through a phase, or you just haven't found the right people yet. Sometimes those things are true, and sometimes they're just the story loneliness tells to keep itself alive. Let me talk about the loneliness that lives inside relationships, because I think this is the version that people are least equipped to name or address. You can be in a relationship, a real one, a loving one, a relationship that is genuinely good in many of the ways that matter, and still be profoundly, specifically lonely inside it. Not because your partner doesn't care, not because the relationship is failing, but because the gap is there, because the edited version of you is the one who shows up even in the safest relationship you have. You've never fully told them what's happening inside you, not the real version. You've given them pieces, the pieces that seemed manageable, the pieces that wouldn't worry them, the pieces that wouldn't require them to hold something too heavy. You've protected them from the full weight of it, and in doing so you've protected yourself from being fully known, and the fully unknown self is lonely. It doesn't matter how much warmth is in the room. It doesn't matter how loved you technically are. If the true version of you is not in the relationship, the true version of you is alone. That's a specific and devastating form of loneliness. Because you can't even name it, you can't point to the absence of love, the love is there. You can't explain why you feel this way when objectively things are fine. You just feel it, quietly, persistently. The loneliness of being loved as someone slightly smaller than you actually are. I want to name the physical experience of loneliness because I think we stay too much in the emotional description and not enough in the body. It lives in the chest, mostly, a specific hollowness there that's different from sadness. Sadness has weight. Loneliness has absence, a removed quality, like something that should be present isn't. It lives in the Sunday afternoons, in the specific quality of time on days when the structure falls away and there's nothing to do and no one expecting you, and the hours stretch out in a way that should feel like freedom, but feels like exposure, like too much space with not enough to fill it. It lives in the moments right after social interaction, when you've been with people who care about you, people with whom things were genuinely fine, and then you come home and sit down and notice that you're no different, that the interaction didn't change anything inside you, that the loneliness was waiting exactly where you left it. That's the one that's hard to explain to people who haven't felt it. You were just with people. How can you still feel alone? But the loneliness was never about the absence of people. It was about the absence of being truly met, and being in the same room as people who don't fully know you doesn't cure it. It sometimes makes it worse, because the contrast becomes visible. There's something I want to say about what loneliness does to your relationship with yourself, because I think this is where the deepest damage lives. When you've been lonely long enough, and when real connection has been unavailable for long enough, you start to internalize the isolation. You start to believe, at some level underneath the conscious, that the loneliness is accurate, that it reflects something true about you, that you are, in some fundamental way, a person who is not quite reachable, not quite connectable, slightly outside the warmth that other people seem to access more easily. And that belief, quiet, unexamined, installed over years of accumulated evidence that was being read through the distorted lens of loneliness, shapes everything. It shapes who you try to connect with, how much you risk in relationships, how quickly you pull back when something gets close, how much you trust when someone offers warmth. You start to feel like an outsider to your own life, like you're watching other people have the thing you want from a slight remove. Like connection is available, it exists, you can see it happening around you, you just somehow can't quite get inside it. That is loneliness that has become a story about who you are, and that story's wrong. But you've been reading it so long, it doesn't feel like a story anymore. It just feels like fact. I want to talk about what loneliness does to hope, because I think this is the part that takes the longest to recover from. When you've been lonely long enough, when connection has felt just out of reach for months or years, you stop fully hoping for it. Not dramatically. You don't make a decision to stop hoping. It just quietly drains out of you over time. The way color drains from something left too long in the sun. You still want connection. The want doesn't go away, but the belief that it's actually coming for you, that you are specifically a person who will get to have the real thing, the full thing, the kind where you are truly known and truly chosen. That belief gets harder to hold. Every time you almost got there and then it didn't work. Every time you let someone in a little and they didn't handle it well. Every time the loneliness was still there after something that should have helped. That accumulation teaches you something. It teaches you to want smaller, to expect less, to be pleasantly surprised if something goes deeper than you expected rather than hoping for depth and being disappointed when it stays at the surface. And wanting smaller is survivable. It gets you through, but it also becomes a self-fulfilling thing. Because when you've stopped hoping for depth, you stop creating the conditions for it. You stop being willing to risk the full version of yourself. You stop reaching for the real thing because the reaching has cost you too much and produced too little, and the loneliness finds a way to maintain itself. Not through malice, just through the accumulated logic of protecting yourself from a hope that keeps not paying off. That's the part that needs to be interrupted. Not the loneliness itself, but the hope you've quietly stopped allowing yourself. The belief that the real thing is still possible for you specifically. It is. That's not a platitude. It's just true. But you have to be willing to want it again before it has any chance of arriving. So what does getting out of this look like? Not a simple answer. There isn't one. But some true things worth saying. The first is that you have to let someone see you, actually see you, not the managed version, the real one. This is terrifying if you've been managing for a long time. It will feel like too much, like oversharing, like making yourself unnecessarily vulnerable in a way that could go wrong. Do it anyway. Not with everyone. You don't owe everyone the full version of yourself, but with someone, the right someone, the person who has shown up consistently enough, carefully enough, that the risk is worth taking. Let them see the thing you've been keeping back. Let the gap close just a little with one person who has earned it. That experience of being seen and not destroyed by it, of offering the real version and having it received with care, is the thing that starts to recalibrate the distortion, that starts to build new evidence that the loneliness story is wrong. That starts to teach your nervous system that connection is safe in a way that no amount of intellectual understanding ever could. The second is that you have to grieve the connections you've been settling for. The surface ones, the ones where the warmth was real, but the depth was never allowed to develop. Not with anger and with honest sadness, because you deserved more than that. You deserved to be known, and settling for being liked, for being comfortable, for the managed version of connection that was its own kind of loss. It deserves to be grieved as a loss. The third is the hardest one. You have to be willing to be lonely out loud instead of lonely in silence. Because lonely in silence is what keeps the loop going. It keeps the loneliness invisible, unaddressed. Something that nobody can reach because nobody knows it's there. Lonely out loud, naming it, saying it, letting someone know that you've been further away than you seemed, is the thing that opens the door. Not to immediate connection, but to the possibility of it. You have been managing the distance for a long time, keeping yourself at the level of closeness that felt safe, editing yourself into something smaller and more presentable and easier to be around, doing the invisible work of being known just enough and no more. And you have been lonely inside all of that, persistently, quietly, in a way you've gotten so used to that some days you forget it isn't just how life feels. It isn't just how life feels. It's how life feels when you've been protected from the real version of it for too long. The real version involves risk, involves being seen in ways that could go wrong, involves letting people close enough that they could hurt you if they chose to, involves the specific vulnerability of being fully present with another person and not knowing in advance how it will go. That's terrifying. That's the thing you've been protecting yourself from. But it's also the only place where the loneliness actually ends. Not the surface of connection, the inside of it. The real thing, the kind where someone knows you and stays anyway, and the knowing is the whole point. You've been standing outside that for a long time. The door was never locked. You just convinced yourself it was. You know what hurts the most? It's not being rejected. It's realizing the person you care about never felt the same way to begin with. Not in the way you did. Not in the way you hoped they did. And the worst part is, you didn't realize it right away. Because at first everything felt real. The conversations felt natural. The laughs felt genuine. The late night talks felt personal. There were moments where it seemed like something deeper was building between you. Little moments that made you believe this could actually turn into something. And when you start believing that, your heart slowly gets involved. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start paying more attention to them. You notice the way their voice changes when they're excited. The way they talk about the things they care about. The way their mood shifts when something's bothering them. You start remembering small details about them without even trying. Things they mentioned once in passing. their favorite music, their favorite food, the stories about their past, and without realizing it, they begin taking up more space in your mind. You think about them when something funny happens. You think about them when you hear a song they would like. You think about them when something reminds you of a conversation you once had. That's how feelings grow, quietly, naturally, without asking permission. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel different, not wrong, just uneven. You notice that you're always the one starting conversations. You're the one asking questions, the one keeping things going, the one making the effort to stay connected. They still respond. They still talk to you. They still laugh and joke like everything is normal. But something about it feels lighter for them, like they're enjoying the moment, but not investing in it the same way you are. And you try not to think too much about it because you don't want to ruin what you have. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself they might just be busy or distracted or maybe just not good at expressing their feelings. So you keep showing up, you keep being patient, you keep being kind. Because part of you believes that if you're consistent enough, if you're supportive enough, if you care enough, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day they'll look at you differently. Maybe one day they'll realize you were there all along. Maybe one day the feeling will finally grow on their side too. But deep down, there's a quiet fear you try not to face. A small voice that keeps asking the same question. What if they never feel the same way? And that thought is something your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Title: She Doesn't Feel the Same Way. Part 2. The hardest part isn't the moment you realize she doesn't feel the same way. It's everything that happens before that moment. The waiting, the hoping, the convincing yourself that maybe you just need to give it more time. Because feelings don't always grow instantly, right? Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need to see your consistency. Sometimes they need to realize what's right in front of them. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. So you keep showing up. You keep answering her messages. You keep making time for her even when your day is busy. You listen when she talks about her problems. You support her when she's stressed. You try to be the person she can always rely on, the person who understands her, the person who stays. And slowly, you start building this idea in your head, not just about who she is, but about who the two of you could be together. You imagine simple things, conversations that haven't happened yet, moments that might happen someday, little scenarios where everything finally clicks into place. And those thoughts feel good. They make the waiting feel worth it. They make the uncertainty easier to ignore. Because as long as there's still a possibility, you don't have to let go of the hope. But reality has a quiet way of revealing itself. Not all at once. Not with some dramatic moment. Just small things that slowly start adding up. Like the way she talks about someone else, not realizing how it lands when she says it. Or how she mentions a guy she finds attractive. Like it's just normal conversation. Like it wouldn't affect you. Or the way she disappears for hours, sometimes days, then comes back like nothing happened. And you're just happy she replied at all. Even if the message is short, even if the effort feels minimal, you start noticing the imbalance. But you don't want to believe it means something, because admitting the truth would mean facing a reality you've been avoiding. That maybe you care more than she ever will. That maybe you've been building something in your mind that she never intended to build with you. And the worst part is, she didn't lie to you. She didn't promise anything. She didn't say the words that would make you believe she felt the same way. You just filled in the silence yourself. You interpreted the kindness as something deeper, the attention as something meaningful, the connection as something mutual. But kindness isn't always love. Attention isn't always interest. And connection doesn't always mean someone sees you the way you see them. And slowly, the truth starts getting harder to ignore. Not because she suddenly tells you, but because her actions begin saying something your heart can't keep pretending not to hear. She doesn't feel the same way. And the longer you hold on to hope, the heavier that realization becomes. At some point, the truth stops whispering, and it starts becoming impossible to ignore. Not because she finally sits you down and says the words. Most of the time that conversation never even happens. The truth shows up in quieter ways than that. It shows up in patterns, in effort, in the way someone chooses to show up in your life, or the way they don't. You start noticing things you used to overlook. How you're always the one starting the conversation. How if you stop texting first, the silence stretches longer than you expected. hours, sometimes days, and eventually you break. You send the message anyway, because pretending you don't care feels harder than admitting that you do. You start noticing the energy difference too, how excited you are when she replies, and how normal it seems for her, like your presence in her life is something she can take or leave, not something she's worried about losing. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because you're not asking for everything. You're not asking for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. You're just asking for something simple, to feel chosen. But when someone truly wants you, you don't have to beg for that feeling. You don't have to analyze every message. You don't have to question whether you matter. It becomes obvious, and that's when the realization finally hits you. Not all at once, but slowly, like a weight settling on your chest. She doesn't feel the same way. Not in the way you hoped. Not in the way you needed. Maybe she likes you. Maybe she enjoys talking to you. Maybe she appreciates having you around. But there's a difference between appreciating someone and wanting to build something with them. And you start asking yourself questions you were too afraid to ask before. Was I just convenient? Was I just someone who was always there when she needed attention? Was I just filling space in her life while she waited for someone else? Those thoughts sting. But the deeper pain isn't even about her, it's about what you did to yourself while hoping things would change. How long you ignored your own feelings. How long you accepted less than you deserved. How long you told yourself to be patient, when patience wasn't the solution. Because love doesn't grow out of one person trying harder. Love doesn't appear just because you stayed long enough. Love isn't something you can earn by proving your loyalty, and realizing that forces you to face a difficult truth. You can't make someone feel something they don't, no matter how good you are to them, no matter how much you care, no matter how much you wish it were different. And once that truth settles in, you're left with a choice, one that hurts either way. Keep holding on to someone who never chose you, or finally let go, even though part of you still wishes she would. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who doesn't feel the same way isn't losing them, it's accepting that you were never really theirs to begin with. At first, letting go doesn't feel like strength, it feels like defeat, like you're walking away from something that could have worked. If only things were slightly different. If only she saw you the way you saw her. If only she realized how much you cared. If only timing was better. If only you had said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind keeps replaying those what ifs over and over again, because your heart would rather believe in a small chance than accept a painful truth. But eventually something starts to shift inside you. Not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly. You start noticing how tired you are. Tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone for a message that may or may not come. Tired of feeling like your happiness depends on someone else's attention. And that's when a different kind of realization hits you, one that hurts, but also frees you. You didn't lose her because you never had her. What you lost was the version of her you created in your mind, the version that loved you back, the version that chose you, the version that saw your worth the same way you saw hers. But that version never actually existed. It was just hope, and hope can be beautiful, but when it's built on the wrong person, it slowly becomes something painful. You start seeing things more clearly, how much effort you gave, how much patience you showed, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never asked for it. And instead of feeling embarrassed about that, you begin to understand something important. There's nothing wrong with loving deeply. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with believing in someone. The only mistake is giving all of that to someone who was never willing to meet you halfway. And the truth is, one day you're going to meet someone who does. Someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't make you guess how they feel. Someone who doesn't make you feel like loving them is a risk. Because when someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to compete for their attention. You won't have to sit there wondering if you're enough. They'll show you clearly, consistently, without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at this version of yourself. The one who stayed too long, the one who hoped too hard, the one who loved someone who couldn't love him back. And instead of feeling regret, you'll feel something else. Gratitude. Because that experience didn't break you. It taught you. It taught you what love shouldn't feel like. And most importantly, It taught you that the right person will never leave you wondering why they don't feel the same way. Because when someone truly loves you, you'll never have to ask that question again. This one is going to be uncomfortable, not because I'm going to be cruel about it, not because I think you're a bad person or that you deserve to hurt more than you already do, but because I think you've been telling yourself a story about what happened. A very comfortable, very sympathetic, very well-constructed story. And I think that story is costing you more than the heartbreak itself. And I'd rather say the hard thing than watch you carry a version of events that keeps you stuck. So, here it is. Some of what happened was your fault. Not all of it, maybe not even most of it, but some of it. A real, significant, honest sum. And you know that. Somewhere underneath the narrative you've been running, underneath the anger and the grief and the very reasonable pain, you know that you had a hand in this. You know there were things you did or didn't do, patterns you ran, moments where you chose the comfortable thing over the right thing, and that those choices contributed to the ending. And instead of sitting with that, you've been covering it, building a story around the parts that make you the injured party, collecting evidence for the version where this was done to you, not participated in by you. I understand why. I really do. Grief is hard enough without also having to hold accountability for it. When something ends and it hurts this much, the last thing you want to do is look at your own role in the wreckage. But the coping, the stories, the justifications, the careful editing of memory, that's not protecting you. That's just delaying the thing that would actually help. Let me tell you what the coping sounds like, because I think a lot of us do this without fully recognizing it as what it is. It sounds like they were emotionally unavailable, which may be true, but it doesn't ask the question of why you stayed with someone emotionally unavailable for as long as you did. It doesn't ask what that unavailability was doing for you, whether it let you stay at a safe distance too, whether it meant you never had to be feely seen, whether their unavailability was, on some level, a feature rather than a bug. It sounds like they didn't appreciate me, which may also be true, but it doesn't ask whether you made yourself easy to appreciate, whether you communicated what you needed clearly, whether you showed up as the full version of yourself or a managed, careful version designed to be likable, whether you were actually present in the relationship or just there. It sounds like I gave everything and got nothing back. And I want to be careful here because sometimes this is just true, full stop, and you really were in something that took without returning. But sometimes, I gave everything as covering for something else. Sometimes giving everything is a way of controlling the dynamic. Sometimes the constant giving is designed unconsciously to put the other person in debt, to make leaving harder for them, to build a case in advance for why you're the good one if this falls apart. Giving can be generous. Giving can also be a strategy, and only you know which one it was. It sounds like they changed, but people don't usually change in a vacuum. Relationships change people. Your behavior in the relationship changes people. The environment you two created together changes both of you. When someone becomes distant or cold or checked out, it's worth asking, genuinely, honestly asking, what the environment was like. What was it like to be with you when things were hard? What they were responding to. I'm not saying it was your fault they changed. I'm saying change doesn't happen in isolation, and the story that casts you as the passive witness to someone else's transformation is probably missing some of your own. Here's the thing about the comfortable story. The one where you're the one who tried and they're the one who failed. The one where the ending is their fault and your pain is entirely undeserved and there's nothing to examine on your end. That story feels better in the short term. Of course it does. It protects you from the really uncomfortable work of looking at yourself clearly. It lets you stay in the grief without having to complicate it with accountability. It lets you be sad without also having to be honest. But it has a cost, a specific, measurable cost. The cost is that you take nothing from this into the next thing. You exit this relationship with the same patterns, the same blind spots, the same tendencies that contributed to the ending. Because you never looked at them, you never identified them, you never held them up to the light and said, this is a me thing, this is something I do, this needs to change, and then you do it again. Different person, same dynamic, different face on the same shape of relationship, and it ends the same way. And you tell the same story again, and the story protects you again, and you take nothing again. That loop is why some people go their entire lives in relationships that follow the same pattern and never understand why. Not because they're unlucky, because they're very good at being the protagonist of a story, that never asks them to grow. I want to be specific about some of the things we do, the actual behaviors, because I think naming them is more useful than speaking in abstractions. We go cold when we should go honest. Something bothers us and something real and something worth addressing, and instead of saying it clearly, we pull back. We get quieter. We create distance. We let the temperature in the room drop and wait for the other person to notice and ask. And when they don't ask, or when they ask wrong or not enough or in the wrong tone, we take that as evidence that they don't care. When really what happened is we asked them to read our minds and they failed a test they didn't know they were taking. We punish in small ways. We're less warm after a fight. We remember and bring it up later. We keep score and then act like we're not keeping score. We do the thing where we say, "I'm fine," while very clearly not being fine, and then resent them for believing us. We pick the wrong moments to be honest and then wonder why honesty doesn't go well. We drop something heavy right when they're stressed or exhausted or in the middle of something. And when the conversation doesn't go the way we needed, we add it to the list of evidence that they can't handle us, that they don't prioritize our feelings, that they're not equipped for this relationship. We confuse intimacy with intensity. We think fighting means we care. We think drama means depth. We manufacture urgency in relationships that are actually healthy and stable because health and stability feel boring, feel unfamiliar, feel like the absence of passion rather than the presence of something real. We love loudly in the beginning and quietly disappear as it gets more real. We're incredibly present and attentive in the early phase, and then once we feel secure, we coast. We stop putting in the effort that got us here because we think arrival means the work is done. It doesn't. Arrival is when the work starts. We make the other person responsible for our emotional state. When we're happy, it's because of them, and we tell them so. But when we're anxious or insecure or struggling, that's also because of them. Their behavior, their distance, something they did or didn't do. We make them the weather of our inner life and then resent them for not always being sunny. We leave before we leave. We check out emotionally while still physically present. We stop investing in the thing months before it technically ends, and then when it ends, we act like we were fully in it right up to the last moment. We weren't. We'd already started protecting ourselves from a loss we were quietly engineering. Any of that land. Here's what I think is actually underneath the coping, because I don't think it's dishonesty. Exactly. I don't think most people sit down and consciously decide to distort what happened. I think it's fear. Specifically the fear that if you look at your role clearly, if you actually account for your part of the wreckage, you'll find something unfixable, something fundamentally wrong with you, some evidence that you are, at your core, the kind of person who ruins things, who doesn't know how to love correctly, who is too much or not enough or broken in some way that won't yield to effort. That's the fear underneath the story. The story protects you from having to find out if that fear is true. But here's what I want you to hear. Actually hear it. Looking at your part in something doesn't mean confirming your worst fears about yourself. It just means looking at behaviors, patterns, choices, things you did in specific moments for specific reasons that you can understand and, if you choose to, change. You are not your worst moments in a relationship. You are also not separate from them. They're data. They tell you something about where you were, what you needed, how you were operating, and that information is genuinely useful if you let yourself have it. The fear says if I look honestly, I'll find out I'm irredeemable. The truth is, if you look honestly, you'll find out you're human, imperfect and patterned, and sometimes self-protective in ways that hurt other people, just like every person who has ever been in a relationship. That's not a verdict, that's a starting point. Let me talk about what accountability actually looks like, because I think people avoid it partly because they imagine it as this punishing, self-flagellating thing, like looking honestly at yourself means spending months in a shame spiral, rehashing everything you did wrong, deciding you're terrible. That's not accountability, that's just shame with better lighting. Real accountability is quieter than that. It looks more like sitting down at some point when the sharpest grief has passed and asking yourself some honest questions, not rhetorical ones designed to confirm a narrative, actual ones. What did I do in this relationship that I wouldn't want someone to do to me? Not the obvious stuff, not the big fights or the bad days. The small, consistent stuff. The daily texture of how I showed up. What did I know was wrong and keep doing anyway? What did I avoid saying because saying it would have required me to change something I wasn't ready to change? Where was I unfair? Not just in the moments I already know about, the ones I've been editing out of the version I tell people. What did this person need from me that I wasn't willing to give? And was it actually something I couldn't give, or just something I chose not to? Those questions are hard. They're supposed to be hard, but they're also genuinely useful in a way that no amount of righteous anger about what they did to you ever will be, because the answers to those questions travel with you. They're portable. They go into the next relationship and make you better at it. They turn heartbreak into something that costs you once instead of costing you every time. There's one more thing I want to name before we get to the other side of this, and it's the one that's hardest to say because it implicates something we don't like to look at. Sometimes the coping isn't just about protecting yourself from accountability. Sometimes it's about protecting your image of yourself as a good person, as someone who loves well, as someone who, when relationships end, can look back and genuinely say, I tried, I was present, I gave it everything. That image matters to a lot of us, more than we admit. We want to be the person who loved honestly and got hurt anyway, not the person who contributed to their own heartbreak through avoidable choices. We want to be the protagonist of a love story, not the cautionary tale. And so we protect the image. We curate the memory. We tell the story to friends in a way that quietly omits the parts where we weren't our best selves. And slowly, through repetition, we start to believe the curated version. It becomes the real one. The messy, complicated actual version gets buried under the one that makes us look okay. But you can't grow from a version of yourself that you've cleaned up for public consumption. You grow from the real one, the one that includes the moments you're not proud of, the one that captures not just what happened, but how you made people feel, the one that honestly accounts for what you brought into the room, the insecurity, the patterns, the defense mechanisms, the ways you protected yourself that accidentally hurt someone else. And that version isn't shameful, it's just true. And truth is the only thing you can actually work with. I want to say something about the grief, because I don't want this to feel like I'm dismissing it. Your pain is real. Whatever happened, however complicated your role in it, the loss is real and the hurt is real, and you are allowed to feel all of it without having to earn it through perfect behavior. You don't have to have been blameless to deserve to grieve. The grief and the accountability can exist at the same time. In fact, I think that's the only way to actually heal from something like this, not choosing between feeling it and examining it, but doing both. Letting yourself hurt fully while also slowly, with compassion for yourself, looking at what's yours to own. Because the coping and the comfortable story, the edited version, it doesn't actually protect you from the pain. It just reroutes it. You still feel it, you still carry it. You just carry it alongside a story that keeps you from understanding it. And understanding it is what lets you put it down eventually. Not the story, the actual thing. The real account of what happened, your role in theirs, what was real and what was projected, what was love and what was fear wearing love's clothes. That understanding is the only version of this that leads somewhere. The story just leads back to the same place. So stop coping, or start slowly to stop. Not all at once, not by burning down every comforting thing you've been telling yourself in the one brutal session of self-examination. That's not useful either. Just start making room. Start allowing the possibility that the story you've been telling isn't the whole story. Start letting the questions in, not to punish yourself, but because you are curious about yourself and you deserve to know yourself accurately. Start being as honest with yourself about your own behavior as you are about theirs. Because here's what's true. The heartbreak you're carrying right now and the real weight of it, the part that won't quite heal, I don't think it's only about them. I think some of it is about you. About things you did that you wish you'd done differently. About the person you were in this relationship that you don't fully want to be. You know that. You've known it. You've just been covering it with everything else because sitting with it is hard and sitting with it feels like losing. But it's not losing, it's the beginning of actually getting somewhere. The pain doesn't go away when you stop coping, but it changes shape. It becomes something you can hold and look at and learn from instead of something that just lives in you without meaning. And meaning is the only thing that makes any of this worth what it cost. You already paid. You might as well take what you bought. There's a moment after a relationship ends that nobody really prepares you for. It's not the breakup itself. It's what happens after. When everything gets quiet. That's when your mind starts doing something you can't seem to stop. You replay it. The conversations, the moments, the little details that didn't seem important at the time. Your brain starts going back through everything like it's searching for something you missed. You think about the way they said certain things, the tone in their voice during that one argument, the night things felt slightly different but you couldn't explain why. And suddenly those memories feel heavier than they did before, because now you're looking at them with the one thing you didn't have back then, the ending. So your mind keeps asking questions. Was that the moment things started going wrong? Was that when they stopped feeling the same way? Was there something I could have said differently? Something I could have done better? And the worst part is you never get answers. So instead, your brain keeps replaying the same scenes over and over again. Like if you analyze it enough times, you'll finally find the explanation that makes everything make sense. But it never really works that way, because breakups don't usually come from one single moment. They come from 1,000 small things building up quietly over time. Still, that doesn't stop your mind from trying, late at night especially, when the distractions are gone, when your phone isn't buzzing, when the room is dark, when it's just you and your thoughts. That's when the memories get the loudest. You remember the good moments first, the way they used to laugh, the way they looked at you when things were still easy, the little routines you built together without even realizing it. And for a second, it almost feels like they're still there. Then reality comes back, and your mind jumps to the next question. What did I do wrong? Because when someone you loved walks away, it's almost impossible not to assume that somewhere along the way, you messed it up. So you go back through everything again, trying to find the exact moment where things could have been saved. But the truth is, the more you replay it in your head, the more trapped you start to feel in something that already ended. And that's the part nobody talks about. Sometimes the relationship doesn't end when the person leaves. Sometimes it ends weeks later, when you finally stop reliving it. The strange thing about replaying a relationship in your head is that your mind doesn't show you the whole story. It shows you selected scenes, little moments that suddenly feel way more important than they did at the time. You remember the last conversation you had with them. Every word, every pause, every sentence you wish you could take back. You start thinking about what would have happened if you just said something different. Maybe if you had stayed calmer. Maybe if you didn't bring up that one thing. Maybe if you gave them more space. Your brain turns it into this giant what-if loop. What if I did this differently? What if I handled that moment better? What if I noticed the signs earlier? And slowly, without even realizing it, you start rewriting the past in your head. You create these alternate versions of the relationship where everything works out. In those versions, you say the perfect thing. You catch the problems early, you fix the issues before they grow. And in those imaginary timelines, they stay. But reality doesn't work like that. The real relationship didn't have the benefit of hindsight. It was messy. It had misunderstandings. Moments where both of you were tired. Conversations that didn't go the way either of you wanted. And the truth is, two people can genuinely care about each other and still not be able to make it work. But your brain doesn't like accepting that, because accepting that means admitting something painful. Sometimes there wasn't a single moment you could have fixed. Sometimes the ending wasn't about one mistake. It was about two people who just couldn't meet each other where they needed to. Still, your mind keeps searching, because if you can find the moment where everything went wrong, it gives you the illusion that you had control, that maybe you could have prevented the ending. But deep down, you already know something that's hard to accept. If someone was truly meant to stay, the relationship wouldn't collapse because of one imperfect conversation. Love that lasts doesn't disappear over one moment. And when you finally start realizing that, something shifts. The memories don't disappear overnight. You'll still think about them sometimes. But slowly, you stop treating every memory like a clue in a mystery you need to solve. Because some stories don't need to be solved. They just need to be closed. The hardest part about replaying everything in your head is that you think you're searching for closure. But most of the time, you're actually just reopening the wound. Every time you revisit the memories, you're putting yourself back in those moments again. Back in the conversations, back in the arguments, back in the days when things started feeling different. And your brain keeps asking the same question. Why? Why did they stop loving me? Why did things change? Why wasn't I enough for them to stay? But here's the thing about closure. A lot of people think closure comes from the other person explaining everything perfectly. They imagine one final conversation where the other person sits down and says exactly what happened, exactly why things ended, and somehow that explanation makes the pain disappear. But real life rarely works like that. Most endings don't come with perfect explanations. Sometimes people don't even fully understand their own reasons. Sometimes they just feel something change inside them. And that's a terrifying thing to accept. Because if love can change without a clear explanation, then it means there wasn't necessarily a moment you could have prevented. And that's what your mind is trying to fight against. Your mind keeps replaying everything because it wants control. It wants to believe there was a specific moment where the outcome could have been different. But the truth that hurts the most is this: not every ending is caused by a mistake. Sometimes two people just reach a point where they can't continue together. Not because one of them failed, not because one of them wasn't good enough, but because the relationship itself couldn't keep going. And once that happens, no amount of replaying the past will change it. No amount of analyzing old conversations will bring the person back. All it does is keep you emotionally tied to something that already ended. That's why healing doesn't start when the breakup happens. Healing starts when you stop trying to solve the past. When you finally allow yourself to accept something difficult. The relationship is over. And even though your mind keeps pulling you back into those memories, your life is still moving forward. Whether you're ready for it or not, at some point you start noticing something. The memories aren't hurting you the same way they used to. Not because they disappeared, but because you finally stopped treating them like something you need to fix. For a long time, your mind kept going back to the same moments. The last argument, the last message, the last time you saw them. Like if you could just understand it perfectly, the pain would finally make sense. But eventually you realized something important. You weren't replaying it because the answer was still there. You were replaying it because letting go felt like losing them all over again. So part of you held on, not to the relationship itself, but to the idea that maybe you could still figure it out. Maybe if you understood what went wrong, it would somehow undo the ending. But life doesn't give us that kind of control. Some people enter your life, change you in ways you didn't expect, and then they leave. And you don't always get a clean explanation. You don't always get a moment where everything makes sense. Sometimes all you get is time to slowly accept that the story already reached its ending. And when you finally stop replaying it in your head, you start noticing something else. Your life didn't end with that relationship. There are still new people you haven't met. New memories you haven't made. New moments waiting for you that have nothing to do with the past you've been stuck in. Because the truth is, you were never meant to spend the rest of your life trapped in old conversations or wondering about the words you wish you said differently. You were meant to keep living, and one day, without even realizing when it happened, you'll think about them again. But this time it won't feel like a wound. It'll just feel like a chapter of your life that already ended. And you'll finally understand something that once felt impossible. The past only has power over you, as long as you keep replaying it. Why doesn't she love me? I met her on a Tuesday. Nothing special about the day. No rain. No music playing in the background. No movie moment. Just a random Tuesday. She sat 2 seats in front of me in class, laughing with her friend about something I couldn't hear, but I remember thinking one thing. I want to know what makes her laugh like that. The first time we talked was stupid. I dropped my pen. She picked it up before I could. Here, she said, smiling. 3 seconds. That's how long the conversation lasted. But for some reason, I thought about it the rest of the day. Weeks passed. Eventually, we started talking more. At first, it was small things, homework, classes, teachers we both hated. Then it became normal. We'd sit next to each other, walk out of class together, send random messages late at night. And somewhere along the way, I started noticing things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was nervous. The way she laughed at her own jokes. The way she said my name. That's when it happened. I liked her. Everyone around me knew it before I admitted it. My friends would say things like, "Bro, you're down bad." I'd laugh it off. But they were right. Because suddenly everything I did started revolving around her. I'd check my phone hoping she texted. I'd replay conversations in my head. I'd think about what she meant when she said something, over and over again. One night we were texting. It was past midnight. The conversation slowed down until it turned into one of those deep talks people only have when they're tired. She told me about her fears, about how she overthinks everything, about how she's scared of getting hurt, and I remember staring at my screen thinking, how could anyone hurt someone like her? Then she sent a message. Thanks for always being there. That sentence felt like winning the lottery. Months passed like that. Same routine, talking, laughing, late night conversations, but something was missing. Something obvious. She never flirted, never hinted, never gave me the signals everyone talks about, but she also never left. So I convinced myself it meant something. One day my friend asked me a question. Have you told her you like her yet? I laughed. No. Why not? I didn't have an answer. The truth, I was scared, not of rejection, but of losing what we already had. Then one afternoon everything changed. We were sitting outside after class. The sun was going down. People were walking past us. She was telling me about some guy in her class. Yeah, he's really nice. She said something about the way she said it felt different. I tried to play it cool. Oh yeah? She smiled. I think he likes me. My chest tightened. So, do you like him? She paused, then she nodded. Maybe. I remember smiling. I remember saying something like, that's cool. I remember acting normal. But inside my head, one thought kept repeating. Why isn't it me? That night I stared at my phone. Her contact was at the top of my messages. All I had to do was type 3 words. I like you. But my fingers wouldn't move, because suddenly I realized something. If I sent that message, everything could change. A week later, she told me they were going on a date. She seemed excited, happy, and I tried to be supportive. Hope it goes well, I said. She smiled. Thanks. That night I walked home alone. The same question kept replaying in my head, over and over again. Why doesn't she love me? I was there for her. I listened to her problems. I cared about her. So why him? It took me a long time to understand something. Love isn't a reward. It's not something you earn by being the nicest person. You can't calculate it like a math equation. Care plus time plus loyalty not equal to love. Sometimes people just don't feel the same way. Months later, we stopped talking as much. Not because we fought, just because life moves on. Different classes, different schedules, different people. But every once in a while, I still think about her laugh on that random Tuesday. And if you're watching this right now, maybe you're asking the same question I once did. Why doesn't she love me? And the answer might be something you don't want to hear. Sometimes there isn't a reason. But one day you'll meet someone who looks at you the way you once looked at her. And when that happens, you won't have to ask the question anymore. Because the right person won't make you wonder. They'll make it obvious. You know what the worst part is? It's not the rejection. It's the almost. Because when someone rejects you clearly, it hurts. But at least it makes sense. They say no. You move on. But when someone almost loves you, that's a different type of pain, because you start replaying everything, every conversation, every laugh, every moment you thought meant something, and you start asking yourself questions that never have real answers. Did I say something wrong? Was I not good enough? Did I wait too long? After she started dating that guy, things between us didn't stop immediately. That's what made it worse. We still talked sometimes, still laughed, still had those random conversations that used to make my day. But something had changed, and we both knew it. There was this invisible line between us now. Before, it felt like we were walking towards something. Now it felt like we were standing still, and she was slowly walking away. One night she texted me again. Can I vent for a second? Of course she could. She always could. So I stayed up listening to her talk about problems with her boyfriend, how he didn't understand her, how he didn't listen the way I did, how he wasn't as patient as I was, and the entire time I just sat there thinking one thing. Then why aren't you with me? But I didn't say that. Instead, I said the same thing I always said. I'm here for you. And she replied with the same message she always sent. You're such a good friend. That sentence. You're such a good friend. People say it like it's a compliment. But when you love someone, that sentence feels like a door closing. Because suddenly you realize something. You weren't the guy she loved. You were the guy she felt safe with. The guy she vented to. The guy who listened. The guy who stayed. But safety doesn't always create attraction. And that realization messes with your head. Because you start thinking, maybe I should have been different. Maybe I should have flirted more. Maybe I should have been less available. Maybe I should have acted like I didn't care. And that's when something dangerous starts happening. You begin to question the way you are as a person. You start thinking kindness is weakness. You start thinking loyalty is stupidity. You start thinking caring too much is the reason you got hurt. So slowly, you start changing. You stop texting first. You stop opening up. You stop showing people the parts of you that once cared deeply. Because somewhere in your mind, you're trying to protect yourself. I remember the exact moment I noticed that change. She sent me a message one afternoon. Something funny. A meme we both would have laughed at months earlier. I looked at it, and for the first time, I didn't feel anything. Not excitement, not happiness, just nothing. And that scared me more than the heartbreak ever did. Because heartbreak means you cared, but feeling nothing, that means something inside you shut down. That night I stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that happened, and for the first time I asked a different question. Not, why doesn't she love me? But why did I give so much of myself to someone who never asked for it? That realization hits hard, because the truth is, she never promised me anything. She never said she loved me. She never said we were going to end up together. Those were expectations I built in my own head, and when those expectations broke, I blamed her. But deep down, I knew something. I wasn't just sad about losing her. I was sad about losing the version of me that believed things would work out. The version of me that believed if you cared enough, if you tried hard enough, if you stayed long enough, eventually someone would choose you. But life doesn't work like that. And realizing that changes you quietly, slowly, but permanently. But because after that, you start guarding your heart differently. Not because you want to, but because you remember exactly how it felt when someone almost loved you. And almost can mess someone up for a long time. And the craziest part, even after all that, there were still nights where I caught myself wondering the same thing, just staring at the ceiling, asking a question I already knew the answer to. Why doesn't she love me? You know what nobody tells you about heartbreak? It doesn't end the day you realize the truth. That moment where everything finally clicks, where you accept she isn't choosing you, where you tell yourself you're done thinking about her. That's not the ending. That's just the beginning of the quiet part. Because after that realization, life keeps moving, but your mind doesn't move as fast. You still catch yourself checking your phone sometimes, not because you expect a message, but because your brain spent so long hoping for one that the habit never fully disappears. You'll hear a song that reminds you of her, or pass a place you both used to talk about, or see something random that you know she would have laughed at, and for half a second, your mind goes straight to her, before you even realize it. It's strange how people can leave your life, but pieces of them stay behind in your routine, in your memories, in the way you think. At first you hate that. You want to forget everything. Every late night conversation, every inside joke, every moment you thought meant something, because remembering feels like reopening a wound that's trying to close. But memories don't disappear just because you want them to. They fade slowly, and that takes time. During that time, you start noticing something about yourself, something you didn't see when you were chasing her. You start realizing how much of your energy went into someone who never fully gave theirs back, how much time you spent thinking about what she wanted, what she needed, what she felt, while completely ignoring your own feelings. You start asking yourself questions you never asked before. Why was I okay with being second? Why was I always the one giving more? Why did I keep staying when the signs were obvious? And the honest answer isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's because you liked the idea of her more than the reality. Sometimes it's because you thought if you were patient enough, if you were good enough, eventually she'd realize what she had. But the hardest truth, sometimes people already know exactly what they have. They just don't want it the same way you do. That realization used to make me angry. Not at her, at myself. Because once you see the pattern, you start wondering how many times you ignored your own instincts. There were signs, of course there were. Moments where she pulled away, moments where her effort didn't match yours, moments where you felt confused instead of secure. But every time those moments appeared, you explained them away. You told yourself she was just busy, just stressed, just going through something. You gave her the benefit of the doubt so many times that eventually you stopped questioning anything at all. And that's when you lost control of the situation, not because she manipulated you, but because you convinced yourself that waiting was the same thing as building something. Eventually, though, life forces you to move forward, even if your heart isn't completely ready. Weeks pass, then months. You start focusing on other things, work, friends, your own goals, the parts of your life that existed before she showed up. And slowly, you start feeling like yourself again. Not the exact same person, but a version of you that's a little quieter, a little more cautious, a little harder to read. One day you notice something strange. You go a whole day without thinking about her, then 2, then a week. And when you finally do remember her, the feeling isn't the same, the pain isn't sharp anymore. It's dull, distant, like a memory instead of a wound. That's when you realize something important. You didn't just lose her. You learned something from her. You learned what it feels like to give your heart fully. You learned what it feels like when that heart isn't returned. And most importantly, you learned what it feels like to survive that. Because at one point, and you thought that pain would break you, that it would stay forever, that you'd never stop asking the same question. But eventually, that question starts changing. It stops being, why doesn't she love me? And starts becoming something else. Something quieter, something more honest. Why did I believe someone who never chose me was meant for me? You know what's strange? For the longest time, the question stayed the same. Why doesn't she love me? It sat in the back of your mind like a locked door you couldn't open. You replayed every conversation, every moment, every small detail, trying to find the exact second where something went wrong. Maybe if you had said something different. Maybe if you had waited longer. Maybe if you had been more patient, more confident, more interesting, more enough. That's the dangerous part about unreturned love. It convinces you that the problem must be you. Because if the problem is you, then at least it means you could have fixed it. But the truth is something most people don't realize until much later. Love isn't a test you pass by trying harder. It's not a reward you earn by being patient. It's not something you convince someone to feel. Real love happens naturally. 2 people choosing each other, not one person chasing while the other hesitates. Not one person waiting while the other decides. Choosing freely every day. And once you understand that, something inside you shifts. You stop looking back at the situation as a failure. You start seeing it as clarity. Because if someone doesn't love you, it doesn't mean you were unlovable. It just means you were loving the wrong person. That realization takes time to accept. At first, it almost feels unfair. Because you gave so much. Your time, your attention, your loyalty, your patience. And in the end, you didn't get the ending you hoped for, but something else happened instead. You changed. You became more aware, more protective of your energy. You started noticing the difference between interest and convenience, between effort and empty words, between someone who enjoys your attention and someone who genuinely values your presence. That kind of awareness doesn't come from easy love. It comes from heartbreak. And one day, without even realizing it, you stop thinking about her in the same way. You remember the story, but you don't feel trapped in it anymore. She becomes part of your past, not the center of your future. And when you think back to the question that once consumed you, why doesn't she love me? You finally understand something. It was never the right question. The real question was never about her feelings. It was about your worth. And the moment you stop measuring your value through someone else's love, that question disappears completely. Because the truth is simple. Someone out there will meet you. And they won't hesitate. They won't need time to figure it out. They won't treat you like an option. They'll see you. They'll choose you. And they'll make that choice obvious. When that day comes, you won't be asking why someone doesn't love you anymore. You'll finally understand that the right person never makes you question it in the first place. There's a version of you that exists only in your head. It's the version that said the wrong thing in that conversation 3 years ago and is still replaying it. The version that's already prepared a full emotional response to a fight that hasn't happened yet. The version that read one slightly short text message and spent 45 minutes building a case for why everything is falling apart. That version of you is exhausting, and it never sleeps. And if you're being honest, it runs a lot more of your life than you'd like to admit. I've been thinking about this for a while, not in a clinical way. I'm not here to diagnose anything or hand you a breathing exercise, but in the way you think about something when you've lived inside it long enough that you finally want to understand it. When the pattern has repeated enough times that you're done being surprised by it and ready to actually look at it. Because I think a lot of us are losing to our own minds, quietly, daily, in ways that don't look dramatic from the outside, but are absolutely exhausting from the inside. And I think we've been told it's just anxiety, it's just overthinking. Take a walk, drink some water, journal about it. And none of that is wrong exactly, but it's also not quite getting at the thing. The thing is deeper than a habit, it's closer to a worldview. Let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I understand it. Your mind learned to do this. It wasn't born doing it. At some point, probably pretty early, you were in a situation where paying close attention to other people's moods and signals and the slightest shifts in their behavior was actually useful. Where catching the early warning signs kept you from getting hurt. Where being one step ahead of a situation meant you could manage it before it managed you. So your brain got good at that. Really good. Exceptionally, almost professionally good at scanning for threat, at noticing the micro shift in someone's tone and running it through a threat assessment model at lightning speed, at filling in the gaps between what people say and what they might mean with worst case scenarios, because worst case scenarios are what your brain learned to prepare for. That was adaptive once. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate something that was genuinely hard to navigate, but you carried it out of that situation and into every situation after it. And now you're threat scanning in a text message from someone who loves you. Now you're running worst case scenarios about a meeting that hasn't happened yet. Now you're braced for impact in environments that are not actually dangerous, with people who are not actually threatening, because your nervous system never got the memo that the original thing ended. It's still doing its job. The job is just wrong for where you are now. Here's what overthinking actually feels like from the inside, because I think it gets flattened into a word, overthinking, and that word doesn't capture the texture of it. It starts with a small thing, almost always a small thing that your mind snags on, the way a nail snags a piece of clothing, something someone said or didn't say, the way a conversation ended, a silence that lasted a second too long, a tone that was slightly off from how it usually sounds. Most people's brains would register that small thing, file it under probably nothing, and move on. Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain picks it up and starts turning it over, looking at it from every angle, running through possible explanations, building a context around it. And because your brain is very good at building context, because you are honestly an intelligent and perceptive person, the context it builds is detailed, specific, coherent. It has internal logic, it hangs together. It just might be completely wrong. And here's the brutal part. You know it might be wrong. Somewhere in there, underneath all the architecture your brain is constructing, there's a quieter voice saying, you don't actually know this. You're guessing this might be nothing. But the louder voice, like the one with all the evidence it's been collecting, the one that has built this whole case, that voice is very convincing. It has receipts. It has a timeline. It has a narrative that makes sense, so you believe it, or at least you half believe it, enough to act on it, enough to pull back a little or go quiet or preemptively protect yourself from a wound that might not be coming. And then the thing you were afraid of might actually happen, not because you were right, but because the way you responded to your own fear created the distance you were trying to prevent. That's the loop. That's the one that runs your life if you let it. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think this is where the overthinking mind does its most significant damage. And I think it's because relationships are inherently ambiguous. People are complicated, communication is imperfect, feelings shift. And ambiguity is exactly the kind of environment where an overthinking brain absolutely goes to town. You're with someone, or close to being with someone, and things are good, things are genuinely good, but your brain doesn't fully trust good. Good feels precarious. Good feels like a setup for something. So even while things are good, there's a part of you that's quietly scanning for the thing that's going to make it not good. And because you're scanning for it, you find things. Not because they're definitely there, but because if you look hard enough at anything, any relationship, any person, you will find ambiguity. You will find moments that could be read multiple ways. You will find evidence for almost any narrative if that's what you're building. So you find something, a slightly distant response, a canceled plan, a moment where they seemed somewhere else, and the machine kicks in. And now you're building the case for why this is falling apart while simultaneously pretending everything is fine. Because you know that bringing this up will make you seem crazy, will make you seem like too much, so you hold it. You process it internally. You have the conversation in your head 100 times. You prepare for outcomes that haven't happened. You grieve things that are still here. And all of that invisible work, all of that mental labor that the other person has no idea is happening, exhausts you, makes you quieter than you actually are, makes you pull back when you want to be close, makes you act in ways that are slightly misaligned with how you actually feel, because you're not responding to reality. You're responding to the story your brain wrote about reality. And eventually, inevitably, the other person notices that something is off, not what's actually off. They can't see that. It's all internal, just that something is off, and they adjust. And you interpret their adjustment as confirmation of the story you already wrote, and the loop tightens. Here's the part I want to sit with for a minute, because I think it's the part that gets missed. Overthinking isn't just a processing style. It's also, underneath everything, a form of control. Stay with me on this. When you can't control whether someone is going to hurt you, and you never can. That's just the fundamental vulnerability of caring about people. Your brain finds another way to feel in control. It prepares, it anticipates, it runs every possible scenario so that when something goes wrong, at least you saw it coming. At least you're not blindsided. At least the pain arrives in a context you already built. Because being blindsided feels worse than being right about something bad. Being surprised by loss feels more devastating than having predicted it. So your brain works very hard, all the time, to make sure you are never surprised. The cost of that is never being fully present, never being fully relaxed into something good, always holding a part of yourself back, just in case, always watching the door even when you're inside somewhere warm. It's a terrible trade, but it feels like the safer one, and your brain is always going to root toward what feels safe. Let me tell you what the really insidious version of this looks like. Because the everyday overthinking, the text analysis, the reading of rooms, the pre-lived arguments, that stuff is visible enough that you can at least identify it. The insidious version is quieter. It's the way you talk yourself out of good things before they have a chance to become good. Someone shows interest, and instead of letting yourself feel that, you immediately start cataloging their flaws. Not because they're actually deal breakers, because if you can find enough flaws, then when it doesn't work out, you can point to the flaws. You already knew you were never fully in it. It's the way you self-sabotage in advance. Pull back before they can pull back. End it before it can end badly. Leave before you can be left. It's the way you rewrite your own history to confirm the story your brain likes to tell. You felt something real, and then it hurt. And now when you look back at it, your brain has quietly edited the memory so that the signs were always there. You should have known. You were naive to trust it. Look how clearly it was written on the wall from the beginning. It wasn't written on the wall from the beginning. You were just present, open, hoping, the way a person is supposed to be. And something went wrong. And now your brain is retroactively building the case that you should have been closed. Because being closed would have hurt less. Being closed would have hurt less. And also produced nothing. And also made you smaller. And also been a kind of living death. But your brain doesn't calculate for aliveness, it calculates for safety. And sometimes safety and aliveness point in completely opposite directions. I've been thinking about the relationship between overthinking and self-worth, because I don't think they're separate things. I think a lot of people who overthink, not all, but a lot, do it because somewhere underneath the mental noise, there is a quiet belief that they are more likely to be rejected than not, that if someone really knew them, they'd leave. That the connection they feel is always more fragile than it appears, because they are, in some fundamental way, more difficult to love than other people, and the overthinking is partly an attempt to manage that. If you can see the rejection coming, you can prepare. If you can find the evidence early, you're not naive. If you hold back a little, you're protected. But also, and this is the part that's harder to say, the overthinking feeds that belief. Because when you're constantly generating worst case scenarios, constantly looking for the signs of leaving, constantly preparing for the end, you are practicing the belief that the end is inevitable. You are rehearsing it. You are making it more real in your body and your nervous system every single time you run the simulation. The mind is very literal about what it practices. If you practice being rejected, your brain gets better at feeling rejected. If you spend enough time preparing for loss, your nervous system stops distinguishing between the preparation and the actual thing. You end up carrying the emotional weight of a loss that hasn't happened. And you do that every day, for weeks, months, years. And then people ask why you seem tired. So what do you do with it? I'm not going to pretend I have the full answer. I don't think the full answer exists in a way that can be written down and handed to you, but I do think there are some true things worth saying. The first one is, your thoughts are not facts. I know that sounds like something on a motivational poster, and I'm sorry about that because it's actually a profound and difficult thing to practice. Your mind produces thoughts the way your body produces heat, constantly, automatically, without your permission. And not all of those thoughts are accurate. Not all of those thoughts deserve to be believed. The feeling of certainty that your brain attaches to its worst case scenarios is not evidence that those scenarios are real. It's just evidence that your brain is very good at its job. The second one is, presence is the antidote, and presence is hard. Because presence means actually being in the moment you're in, not the moment your brain has already moved to. It means feeling the good thing while it's happening, instead of scanning it for the reasons it won't last. It means trusting, not blindly, not naively, but with the actual evidence in front of you, that right now, things are okay. Letting okay be okay without immediately upgrading it to a threat. The third one, and this is the one that took me the longest, is that you have to grieve the version of safety that overthinking promises. Because it does promise something. It promises that if you think hard enough, prepare enough, stay alert enough, you will be protected. You will not be caught off guard. You will not be hurt in the ways you've been hurt before. That promise is a lie, but it's a comforting lie. And giving it up means accepting that you cannot think your way to safety in relationships. You cannot prepare your way out of vulnerability. The only way through is actually through, open, present, willing to be surprised by both the good and the bad. That is terrifying if you are someone who has been hurt, and most of the people reading this have been hurt. But the alternative, staying inside the machine, living in the pre-lived loss, holding yourself back from the full experience of being alive with another person, that's not safety. That's just a slower kind of missing out. Your mind gets the best of you because it loves you in its way. It is trying to protect you. It learned something once about how the world works, and it has been faithfully applying that lesson ever since. Even when the lesson no longer applies, even when the environment changed and the people changed and you changed, it doesn't know it's out of date. It just keeps running the old program, trying to keep you safe, costing you peace. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally harder to love than other people. You are someone whose brain learned to be very careful, and that carefulness served a purpose once, and now it's costing you more than it's protecting you. And the work, the long, uncomfortable, ongoing, nonlinear work, is teaching it that it's okay to put the armor down. Not all the way, not all at once, just enough to let something real get in, just enough to be here, actually here, in the life you're living instead of the one your mind keeps rehearsing. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. Let yourself be here. You're always the loser. There's a version of losing that nobody prepares you for. Not the kind where you fail a test or lose a job or get broken up with in a parking lot while your hazards are still on. That kind of losing is clean. It hurts, but it has a shape. You know what you lost. You know when it happened. You can point to the moment and say, that's the one. That's where it went wrong. The kind I'm talking about doesn't have a moment. It's the kind where you keep showing up, keep trying, keep being the bigger person, keep choosing the high road, and somehow, at the end of all of it, you're still the one sitting alone wondering where you went wrong. You did everything right, or at least you did more right than wrong, and you still lost. Not once, every time, and you start to wonder if that's just your thing, if losing is just something that happens to you specifically. I've been thinking about this for a while now, not in a wallowing way, more like there's something here I haven't named yet, and I need to name it before it keeps running my life. because I think most of us who always end up losing in relationships, friendships, romantic stuff, family stuff, doesn't matter. We don't lose because we're bad at this. We lose because of something that looks like a strength from the outside, something that people compliment us for, something we were taught was the right way to be. We lose because we care more. And I know how that sounds. I know I care too much is the thing everyone says when they want to avoid accountability. Like, yeah, sure, buddy, you care too much. That's why you burned the whole thing down. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about the person who cares so much they become controlling or jealous or obsessive. That's a different thing. I'm talking about the person who genuinely, quietly, consistently loves people harder than those people love them back, and keeps doing it, and can't stop, and doesn't know why. That person always loses. Not dramatically, just slowly, over and over again. Let me back up. I think it starts young. Not in some deep trauma way. I'm not trying to make this a therapy session, but I do think most of us learned early what role we were playing, and some of us learned that our role was to be the one who holds things together. Maybe you were the kid who noticed when mom was in a mood and adjusted accordingly. Maybe you were the one in your friend group who everyone came to when stuff was falling apart. But when your stuff was falling apart, you kind of just handled it yourself because it felt like too much to ask. Maybe you were the sibling who kept the peace, the partner who apologized first even when you weren't wrong, just because the silence was too heavy. You learned that love looked like management, like anticipation, like making yourself small enough that everyone else could be big. And here's the thing, and it worked. People liked you, people needed you, people said you were the glue, the rock, the steady one. Nobody asked if the glue was tired, so you kept going. You got good at it, really good. You got so good at reading rooms and adjusting and being whatever the situation needed that you kind of forgot to figure out what you needed. Or maybe you knew somewhere, but asking for it felt like breaking a rule you didn't write, but somehow agreed to. And that pattern, that beautiful, exhausting, self-erasing pattern, follows you into every relationship you ever have. Here's how it plays out in practice. You meet someone, it could be a friend, could be someone you're falling for, doesn't matter. You connect, it feels real. And from the jump, you're in it, you're present, you remember the details, you follow up on the thing they mentioned 2 weeks ago, you show up when you said you would, you notice when something's off and you say something. They like this about you. They tell you. You're different, they say. You actually listen, you actually care, and you feel it. That warmth of being seen, of being valued, of finally being in something that feels like it matches what you've been putting out for years. Except, slowly, quietly, you start to notice the math doesn't add up. You text first most of the time. You're the one who makes the plan. When something good happens to you, you tell them, and they respond warmly but briefly and then pivot to themselves. And when something good happens to them, you ask follow-up questions. You want to know everything. You're genuinely excited for them. They don't do that for you. Not in the same way, and you tell yourself it's fine. People show love differently. You can't expect everyone to be exactly like you. That would be unfair. That would be projecting. So you keep going. But then something hard happens to you, something real, and you reach out and they're supportive, but it feels surface level, like they're being a good person in the way you are a good person to a coworker you don't know that well. Polite, present, but not in it with you. And you know the difference. You know what it feels like when someone is actually in it with you because you've been in it with them. You know what it feels like to sit with someone in their hard thing. You've done it. You're good at it. They're not doing that. They're being kind, but they're not in it with you. And here's the moment. Here's the fork in the road that most of us don't even know we're standing at. You could say something. You could name it. You could say, hey, I feel like I'm carrying more of this than you are, and I need that to change. But you don't, because that feels like an accusation. Because you don't want to be the person who keeps score. Because what if you're wrong? What if you're being too sensitive? What if bringing it up ruins the whole thing and then you lose them anyway and it's your fault? So you say nothing, and you adjust your expectations down a little, and you keep going. And 6 months later, you're half the person you were when you started this, and they're exactly the same, and you're exhausted, and you don't even know why. That's the loss. That's the one that doesn't have a moment. I want to talk about the hope problem, because I think hope is actually the engine of all of this. Not hope in the inspirational poster sense. I mean hope in the very specific, very quiet sense of, I think if I keep being this way, eventually it'll come back to me. You believe somewhere underneath everything that love is a long game, that consistency gets rewarded, that if you keep showing up and being real and caring deeply enough, one day the person on the other end of it will match you, will finally see what you've been putting out and rise to meet it. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people do wake up. Sometimes the thing you've been patient for actually blooms, but a lot of the time, and I think most of us know this but don't want to say it, a lot of the time, the hope is just delay. It's a way of not having to grieve something that's clearly already gone. Because as long as you're hoping, you don't have to admit that the version of this you wanted was never actually available. That's brutal to accept. That someone you love genuinely, deeply, for real, that someone might just not be built to love you back the way you need. Not because they're bad, not because you did anything wrong, just because they're different. They're wired different. They're at a different place. They need different things. You can love someone and still be wrong for each other. You can care about someone and still be the wrong shape for the hole they're trying to fill. That is a complete sentence. That is the whole truth. There's no fix at the end of it. And when you're the person who loves more, when you're always the one who's more in it, more invested, more hopeful, that truth hits different. Because it means all that extra love you were putting out wasn't the solution. It was just yours. It lived in you. It didn't change anything. That's the part that makes you feel like a loser. But here's where I want to sit for a second, because I've been turning this over for a while, and I think there's something we get wrong about what losing actually means. We treat losing like it's about outcome. You win if the relationship lasts. You lose if it ends. You win if they choose you. You lose if they don't. You win if you stop caring first. You lose if you still care when they've already moved on. By that math, yeah. If you're the one who cares more, you lose every time. You will always be the last one in and the last one out and the one who misses it the longest. But I'm not sure that's actually losing. I think what we call losing in love is often just feeling more. And feeling more is not the same as being worth less. It is not a character flaw. It is not a weakness. It is actually one of the rarest things a person can have. Most people spend their whole lives looking for someone who will love them with real depth, real presence, someone who actually listens, who actually shows up, who actually stays. And you who always ends up on the losing side of this, you are that person. You are the thing other people are searching for. The problem isn't that you care too much. The problem is that you keep handing that to people who can't hold it. And I know that sounds like I'm just reframing the same loss as a gift, which is a little bit of a cope. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You can call it beautiful all you want, but it still hurts to be in a mostly empty thing when you wanted something full. But I do think there's a real difference between I keep losing because something is wrong with me, and I keep losing because I keep choosing people who can't match what I'm bringing. One of those is a sentence about your worth. The other is a sentence about your pattern. And patterns can change. Worth can't, because it was never the issue. Let me talk about the aftermath for a second, because I think that's where the real damage lives. When you've been the one who cared more enough times, something shifts in you. You start to get suspicious of your own feelings. You fall for someone and there's this voice in the back of your head, quiet but consistent, that says, I don't. You know how this goes. You know where you end up. So you hedge. You hold back a little. You don't text as much as you want to. You don't say the thing you're feeling right away. You play it cooler than you are because you've learned somewhere in your body that the full version of you is too much. And then, and this is the part that's really something, you end up in relationships where you're actually not fully present, where you're performing a version of yourself that's been dialed back. And those relationships don't work either, because you're not actually in them. And you lose those too. So now you're losing when you care too much and losing when you try to care less. There's no version of this that's working, and the voice in the back of your head gets louder. See? You told you. You're just bad at this. You always lose, but you're not bad at it. You're just protecting yourself with a tool that's hurting you. The hedging, the holding back, the performance of indifference, that's not protection. That's just a different kind of losing. Slower, quieter, but still losing. Because you end up alone anyway. Except this time you're also not yourself. I think the thing that actually needs to change, team, and I'm saying this as much to myself as anyone, is not the caring. Don't stop caring. Please don't let the world do that to you. The thing that needs to change is the selection. where you're putting it. Because if you're honest, really honest, you probably knew early. You probably saw the signs, the texts that were always a little shorter than yours, the way they talked about their ex with a little too much energy going either direction, the way they went quiet when you needed them to go loud, the way the effort was always a little asymmetrical. You saw it and you talked yourself out of it because they had so many other good things, and who are you to expect everything? And maybe you're asking for too much, and maybe you just need to give it time. Time doesn't fix asymmetry. Time just shows you what was always true. You have to get better at believing people when they show you who they are early, not cynically, not with your walls up from the jump, but with your eyes open, with the part of you that actually knows what it needs allowed to speak, without being immediately overruled by the part of you that just wants it to work. The right person is not going to require you to shrink yourself to make the relationship function. The right person is not going to make you wonder consistently where you stand. The right person is not going to be a project you're optimistic about. They're going to be someone who makes the asymmetry hard to find because they're actually trying. That person exists. I genuinely believe that. And I think the reason a lot of us haven't found them yet is not because we're unlovable or broken or too much. It's because we keep confusing potential with reality. We keep loving the idea of someone at the expense of the truth of them. So here's where I land on this. You're always the loser. Yeah, in a specific, limited, outcome-based reading of the word. Sure, you care more, you hurt more, you stay longer, you miss it harder when it's gone. But you're not losing at the thing that actually matters. You're not losing your capacity to feel. You're not losing your ability to be present for someone. You're not losing your willingness to be vulnerable even after it's burned you, even though it probably should have made you colder by now, but it didn't. That's not a bug. That is, genuinely, without irony, the whole thing. That's the part of a person that makes love feel like love instead of just convenience. You've been calling it a weakness your whole life because it's kept costing you. But it was never the problem. It was always the best thing about you. The world just kept putting it in front of the wrong people. That's a solvable thing. It's a slow, uncomfortable, sometimes heartbreaking thing to solve. But it's solvable. You're not cursed. You're not broken. You're not destined to always be on the losing side of this. You just need to stop handing your rarest quality to people who don't know what to do with it and start giving it to someone who already knows what they have.